5. In the daylight, it's easier to see how ramshackle this house truly is. The floorboards are old and rotted. Through the ceiling eaves in the kitchen, I can see slivers of sky. As for the kitchen, it's as simple as mine at home. A long wooden countertop, a big sink made of cast iron, a series of open shelves holding big containers, each of which I peer into and inspect. Some of the contents I recognize: flour and animal fat and potatoes, jarred peaches and cherries in pairs. Then there are containers of seeds and syrups and strange-colored substances I can't begin to name. "For aches and pains," the older girl said when she saw me scrutinizing a jar containing a scarlet-colored syrup. She frowned at me, suddenly watchful. "Do you have a headache?" I did, but I wasn't going to tell her that. In this kitchen, there's no hidden pantry containing a massive refrigerator, 2 dishwashers, and a microwave. There's no laundry room with a shelf of chemical-free, scent-free, dye-free detergents. No bathroom either. Through the kitchen window, I can see a small shed by the chicken coop, undoubtedly an outhouse. I am actively at this moment ignoring the nerve cells screaming upward at my brain about how badly I'd like to use it. The floor plan of this house is identical to mine. A small, single-story house with a large kitchen and living space, and 4 bedrooms down the hall. The bedrooms are in the same locations, but instead of bunk beds and Pottery Barn bureaus, the children's rooms have straw mattresses and exposed wooden shelves, each of which holds a few small piles of ratty-looking clothing. Like a time machine, I keep thinking as I poke my head into every room. Like a bruised and beaten version of my life. Finally, I can't take it anymore. I approach the girls at the table and say formally, "I need to use the restroom." "Then go," the older girl says, without even turning around. My head is pounding quietly, a drumbeat reminder of what happened earlier this morning. A good wife doesn't speak to her husband that way. I step outside onto the porch. The sudden brightness sends a high, arcing warning flare of pain through my skull, which momentarily lights up every thought I've ever had, and then just as quickly douses them in darkness. A breeze lifts my hair, cooling my neck. As my eyes adjust to the daylight and the pain recedes, I see that it's autumn here. The leaves on the trees are a deep golden brown, and the faraway mountains are just barely snow-capped. By mid-November, they'll be coated in white. I stare at the mountains, my gaze slowly traveling back to the ranch, over the dips and rolls of thousands of acres of rugged Idaho wilderness, dotted by scrubs of sagebrush and not much else, until finally I reach the far fence line of the crumbling paddocks by the barn. A shabby show of an enclosure, nothing like my fences, which are painted every summer a blinding church white. Suddenly one of the boys, door threshold, shorter one, Noah, walks out of the barn with a horse, guiding him to the paddocks. Our horse, Snickers, beloved brown and white beast. Only, no, not our horse. It feels like I'm looking at the world through an oil slick. The horse's patches are in a slightly different place. The stripe of white on this horse's nose is wider than the one on Snickers, and there's an extra white patch by his belly. We should never have bought a horse to begin with. None of us were riders, and I kept telling Caleb to be reasonable, to think about it, to consider for 1 second how much work a horse would be. But Caleb insisted we would learn. He insisted it was essential. Back when we... A sudden agoraphobia sweeps over me. The fields, the woods, the mountains, an infinite stretch of land. The wild, wild west. Gold rush, cowboys and Indians, mountains of dead buffalo, manifest destiny, smallpox blankets. Rifles in covered wagons and dust bowls and herds of Mustangs and Area 51 and spaceships and aliens, less like planet Earth and more like planet Mars. Suddenly I'm half walking, half jogging across the clearing to the outhouse. I throw open the door and step inside. The stench takes my breath away, but still I shut the door tightly behind me. I feel like a child again, operating on dream logic. If I keep myself hidden beneath the covers, the monsters won't see me. Speaking of children and dream logic. Silly, it couldn't possibly work, but, well, what if it did? Forgive me, Lord. I have to try. After I'm finished peeing, I stand up straight, close my eyes, organize my thoughts, and click my heels together 3 times. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. I throw the door open and say, shit. 6. Every Monday evening, my mother called the dormitory phone line at 7 on the dot to ask me how the week had been, how my social life was going. Had I met any French girls? What about Irish ones? Were there any, deep breath here, Jewish or Muslim girls in the building? Did they pray in front of me? Did they smell like me, or was the odor different? My mother had given birth to my sister when she was 18, then me when she was 20. College hadn't been a consideration. Worldly travels were not an option. The farthest she had ever traveled was to Arizona for a wedding. At the airport, her anxiety about my decision to go to college had been palpable, but now, perhaps because she'd never had the opportunity to do so herself, or perhaps as a means of redirecting her anxieties about her daughter living so far away, she talked non-stop about how exciting it was for me to be there. I can't imagine how many interesting people you'll meet. In response, for the first time in my life, I lied to my mother. I told her it was exactly as she was picturing it, because I thought she'd have a nervous breakdown if I told her the truth. No, college was not the intellectual oasis I had hoped it would be. There were no lecture hall sparring matches of the likes of Socrates and Plato, no passionate debates over free will and creation and the divine intellectual light of man, nor, though, was it Gomorrah, as my sister and mother had worried it would be. Or at least, not as they might have imagined it to be. Rather, I'd found myself in a highly claustrophobic holding tank for rich kids, an artificially intelligent Eden, a warm, incubated landscape designed to keep the worst kids in America safe and warm and well-fed until they matured past the urge to peck each other's eyes out. At first, I thought my roommate troubles would be my biggest challenge, but Rena hadn't brought anyone home since that first night, and then school began, and the true nightmare revealed itself to me. In the first several weeks, I sat frozen in the front row of each class while brash, marble-mouthed kids from Chicago and Los Angeles and Darien talked loudly from the back row. The boys complained about power hegemonies and overseas military interventions, waving their uncalloused palms, even their fingernails unnervingly clean. As for the girls, they proclaimed their horror at the wage gap between the sexes, and while I first thought a shocking number of them had the same medical issue, I soon realized their fingers and hands and forearms were all tie-dyed a grim shade of orange from the fake tanner that passed through our dorm hallways like a spiritual totem. On weeknights, the girls in my hall piled into one room and drank Smirnoff vodka, mixed with zero-calorie grapefruit juice, while they complained about their parents, their boarding schools, their high school boyfriends. No one was grateful to be here. As far as I could see, no one was grateful for anything at all. They all planned to be wives and mothers, and yet they absolutely hated men and kids. They talked about nuclear families the same way they talked about the nuclear bomb. It was a destructive, sexist, militaristic, heteronormative force designed to ruin the world. Literally, they would add for emphasis at the end of every statement they made that could not possibly work in any literal sense. Literally. When they talked about stay-at-home mothers, specifically about their stay-at-home mothers, their eyes didn't go misty with gratitude. Instead, they argued bravely that old-school femininity was a scourge. Any woman who chose to stay in the home instead of working in the world was complicit. Any woman who identified as a homemaker was both a victim and a perpetrator. Of what? I made the mistake of asking once in the beginning. The girls exchanged a series of looks. The Amish girl has spoken. Then Rena, who over the early days of school had been visibly disappointed to realize she wasn't going to climb as high up on the social ladder as she had clearly planned to, and who obviously found me at least partially responsible for this fact, cleared her throat and said tiredly, "The patriarchy, Natalie. Duh." Someone always had a sister who'd left her job to take care of the kids because the daycare costs compared to her salary didn't check out. Someone always had a cousin whose nipples and sleep schedule and sex life were being destroyed by breastfeeding. Someone always had a mother who was actively drinking herself to death in the suburbs, while the father played 52 pickup with some restaurant hostess in the city. One night, one of the girls said, "I kid you not," I quote her verbatim, "I really want to get an elective C-section because then the baby's head won't be all lumpy when it comes out." On another night, Rena told everyone about what happened the first night of school, about the horrible night she'd spent with that boy. He was a predator, she insisted. He gave off major rape vibes. He'd skull-fucked her, she said. She could barely breathe. And then he'd pressured her into sex, and everyone should write his name down. They should remember it and never go home with him, because men like him could never be trusted. I sat on the opposite bunk bed, mute with horror, while she went on. I was already aware that these young women enjoyed blurring the line between fact and fiction. Nuclear families were destructive, C-sections desirable. Pray tell, ladies, in what world? But here, now, was a glaring journalistic error, a false insurance claim about a hit and run that never happened, and I was the only witness. Be nice, my mother warned. I stared into the cup of sparkling water in my lap. Each night, after 2 or 3 hours of this kind of group discussion, the girls would say goodnight, and I would slowly put my nightgown on, feeling lightheaded and a little bit sick. It felt like I was being waterboarded to death by modernity as I got into bed, my fingers shaking so hard I could barely pull back my sheets. It was my mother my mind groped blindly toward, like a dying plant twisting itself into contortions toward the light. I thought of the aprons she hand-embroidered for my sister and me, our names in perfect pink cursive across the breast pocket, and I bit my tongue until it bled. An excruciating thing to admit. I missed being around women who were nice. It was grim. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted, a school where everyone was profoundly, jaw-droppingly unlikable. I could practically hear the Lord whispering in my ear, "Be careful what you wish for, little lamb. You just might get it." The situation was not tenable, but each time I filed a request to move to a single room in another dorm building, the request was denied. "Are you in an unsafe situation?" my RA advisor asked one day. After my 7th formal request to move, she had paid me a visit while Rena was in class. "Well," I hedged. "Not physically, no, but spiritually?" I nodded vigorously. "Very much so." But she was already handing my request back to me. "I'm sorry, but they're not going to approve this." And then one night, the Lord delivered in the most unexpected of ways. It was a Thursday evening. Rena was getting ready to host another pre-game in our room. Tonight was going to be a big night for Rena, I had gathered, through the conversations she had with other girls in front of me. She was going to hook up with a guy she'd been talking to for weeks. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Rena take her 4th shot of vodka in 20 minutes. Predator, I thought, from the safe cocoon of my bed. I'd long since given up the pretense of drinking at these events. I was in pajamas, under the covers, a textbook open in my lap. A trio of girls arrived, looking nervously around at our empty dorm room. Undoubtedly, they had thought more people would be here. "Are we early?" "Oh my God, hi," Rena trilled, sailing past the awkwardness. Come in, come in, come in. I was just pouring your drinks." 2 of the girls lived in our hall and therefore had learned over the early weeks of school not to talk to me. That Catholic girl is weird. But one of the girls was from another dorm. "Hey," she said, "Natalie, right?" When I looked at her, she added, "We're in the same gender studies class." Rena frowned. "Isn't that like a 400-person lecture?" "Well, yeah, but Natalie got into this intense debate with the professor the other day about biological differences. She had all these studies lined up in her arsenal, too, like, bam, women are physically weaker. Bam, men aren't good at domestic chores because their eyesight is designed for predatorial work. Bam, the female body is designed to nurture. And what do you think of that?" The professor was so pissed, the girl said, and laughed. It was honestly hilarious. I didn't say anything. I had thought that the professor had enjoyed that debate. A terribly lonely thought fell over me. Everyone here, even the faculty, seemed to hate me. Whatever, Rena said. Natalie doesn't care what other people think. Do you, Natalie? Rena had done this occasionally in the first few days of school, speak up vaguely on my behalf, but now she used me more frequently as a prop or a punchline for her own flailing social life. I was a dove, and she was an amateur magician, standing in front of an auditorium of mostly empty seats, groping around for my feathers in the depths of her big black hat. What other people think of me is none of my business, I said quietly. God, Natalie. Rena gave me a preening look as she poured more vodka into her cup. You are so precious. Did your mother tell you to say that? A flower of heat bloomed in my chest as the girls laughed easily with each other. It was a flippant joke. Rena certainly didn't expect me to respond. Does the dove ever snap at the magician's fingers? Which is probably why she seemed so startled when I said, just because you hate your mother doesn't mean I have to hate mine. A silence filled the room. Rena set down the vodka handle. I never said I hate my mother. She looked at the girls. When did I say I hate my mother? I returned my attention to my book. Seriously, I love my mother. Of course you do, one of the girls assured Rena, but it must not have worked to soothe her, because when Rena spoke again, her voice was laced with fury. Do you want to know what I think, Natalie? No, Rena, I don't know what you think. In fact, I'm shocked to learn you have any interiority to speak of. I think that you think you're better than all of us. I flipped the page. Are you even listening to me? Without looking up, I said, is that another rhetorical question? Or are you actually interested in hearing a different perspective on the world than your own? The girls behind her tittered in surprise. The Baptist girl thinks. You're mean, Natalie, Rena said. She was slurring a little bit, her tongue anesthetized from vodka. This conversation never would have happened if she wasn't drunk. You roll your eyes when we talk. You make little comments under your breath. You think we don't notice, but we do. And you're extra mean to me. You ignore half the things I say to you, and I think it's because you're jealous of me, because I have friends and a boyfriend. Even in this moment, I registered that this was a big stretch for her to make, a surprisingly brave or perhaps embarrassingly drunk one, especially in front of these girls. And you, on the other hand, are all alone with your imaginary friends, Jesus and Mary and the Holy fucking Spirit. I stared at the page, my brain clicking softly as the Nomi girls laughed. I thought, for the millionth time that autumn, of my mother. What was she doing right now? Probably wiping down the countertops, putting away the leftovers from dinner, humming one of the church hymns she always had stuck in her head. In my entire life, I'd never known my mother to hate anyone, but I felt certain she would hate these girls. At the very least, she'd be appalled to know what they spent their time thinking about. You're wrong, Mama. Not everyone believes in something. At college, there are an astonishing number of people who believe in absolutely nothing at all. My mother had always encouraged me to be a shining light for others. But I was certain that no level of illumination would save these women from the horror of themselves. If anything, they seemed to revel in the pitch-black aimlessness of their lives. They were proud of it, happy to wander blindly forth into a lifetime of selfishness. It was deeply disturbing. Most disturbing of all was the fact that these lost, hateful girls thought someone like me should inherently be jealous of someone like them. No fucking way. Sorry, Lord. I'm not jealous of you, Rena, I said. I closed my book on my finger to keep the page, then I looked at her. If anything, I feel sorry for you, because you're unintelligent and you lack creativity. But most of all, I feel sorry because a person like you will never know true wonder, not once in your life. Her mouth fell open. You are such a bitch. Well, I tapped my finger lightly on the golden embroidered cross on the book cover. I don't concern myself with the opinions of whores. What did you just call me? You heard me. I looked past Rena to her friends. She lied, you know. That boy who went home with her the first night of school. He didn't hurt her, not even close. In fact, she asked him to have sex with her. She practically begged him, and now she's telling everyone who will listen that he threatened her when he did nothing of the sort. So if you ask me, I shrugged. She's the real predator, not him. There was an otherworldly noise, a shriek that split the world in two. In the single moment before my focus returned to Rena, her fingers were already in my hair. Rena, poor thing, wouldn't remember any of the details of that night. She would wake up the next morning in a shirt covered with vomit, her knuckles bruised, a note from the disciplinary committee taped to our door. As for me, I would remember it mostly as the night I learned an old saying was actually true. The Lord did work in mysterious ways. After months of requesting and being denied, I finally got approved to move into a single. As it turned out, all I'd needed was to get my roommate to punch me in the face. The next day, I moved into a small single on the opposite side of campus. Clean and quiet and mine. Finally, I could wake up each morning and whisper my daily prayer of gratitude without worrying she would make fun of me. I could read quietly at night with a door firmly closed, rather than suffering the backward looks of pity from Rena's friends while they came in and out to borrow makeup and clothing in preparation for their weekly excursion to the local frat house, where they would, if they were lucky, revel in 10 to 30 minutes of verbal abuse with the object of their affections before he got bored and decided to finger someone else. At night, while my new dorm neighbors laughed and screamed in one of the rooms down the hall, I stuffed a towel under the crack of the door. I did my homework, and then I did all my extra assignments, and then I sat at my desktop computer and scrolled through a series of lo-fi internet forums, searching for answers to the questions that had sprung up since I arrived at college. Why do modern women hate men so much? Why do modern women hate kids so much? Why do modern women hate themselves so much? How can you have a full-time job and breastfeed at the same time? Instead of answers, though, I only found stories, as well as more questions. Why is the anger getting worse? The modern women asked the forums. Why am I not ready for kids? Where does unhappiness come from? Why can't I seem to remember what I was originally going to do with this college degree? At the end of my first semester, I ran into a girl I'd met at orientation. She was the same year as me, and she belonged to a church group that served Christian students from schools all over the city. I'd gone once, at the very beginning of the semester. It had not been my cup of tea. "You really should come to a meeting again," she said. "We've got a great group of regulars." "It's just not really my thing," I said. This was, I thought, much nicer to say than the truth. The girls in your group are dumb as rocks, and the idea of sharing spiritual communion with them would probably feel like getting intellectually stoned to death. Her expression faltered. "To be honest, Natalie, I'm worried about you. You don't look so good." I smiled stiffly at this girl who'd only ever seen me in passing. "Excuse me? Your hair is greasy and you have these dark circles under your eyes. Are you eating, sleeping? Do you want to talk sometime?" It was the kind of pathologically invasive comment I was used to getting from my mother and the other women at church service back home. The kind of thing you would say to a stranger only if you'd been raised to believe that one woman's failure to keep up appearances reflected poorly on all other women too. Someone like Rena would have immediately told this girl that she was being rude and inappropriate and sexist. Fuck off. But neither of us was like Rena, and this girl knew it. Suddenly I was so homesick I burst into tears. Before long the girl was hugging me, saying, There, I know," as I snotted up her shirt. The next week I started going to the church group. It was held in one of the basement rooms of the main library at Harvard. I sat with the dumb girls, I suffered their little snuffling moans and sighs of glory to God, and it was fine. At least the people in the group knew the sky was blue. At least they didn't spit out mother like the word alone was a pregnancy contraction. At least they were friendly to me. I was still lonely, but now the loneliness felt manageable, like something I could survive. Then, one cold winter evening in the early weeks of my second semester, I met Caleb. 7. Back in the olden days, girls, do you know what it was like to live out in the new territories, the great western expanse? Some people lived in small western towns, smaller than any town you've ever seen. Imagine a handful of buildings clustered along a dirt road. A church, an inn, a general store, a saloon. If you were lucky, the church might have an organ, and the saloon might have a piano, and you might grow up knowing music and community and God. But some families didn't even have that, girls. Some people lived all on their own, in the middle of nowhere, huddled against the elements of endless prairie or mountains or woods. No saloons or general stores, no music or neighbors or heavenly worship to speak of. Their meals were simple and their lives were honorable. By day they caught and cooked and cleaned. By night they sat around the fire to keep warm, and the adults entertained the children with tall tales about great battles in faraway lands. How does that sound, girls? How would you like a life like that? The sun is setting now. I'm sitting in a chair at the kitchen table. Through the window above the sink, I can see the sun falling behind the trees. Orange light spills through the warped glass panes, striping the room with radioactive glow. My mind tilts and lurches uncontrollably, like a broken amusement park ride. I am not. I will not. I cannot. I think I might be. No, I am your husband. Mama? Mama. A few feet away from me, that girl is crouched by the fire, her skirt tucked carefully between her thighs to keep from catching flame. The only one whose name isn't notched into the threshold. I watch her flip each potato half, one by one, revealing a series of perfectly crisp skins, and I think of the careful carvings in the wood, and I just know, that she is the bookkeeper in charge of these records. Excuse me, I say. She doesn't reply. Excuse me, what is your... The girl stands up and turns to face me, and at the sight of her face, like me, like Clementine, Lord save me, I lose my train of thought. Her expression is not a crumble of disappointment, the way Maeve's was earlier. Instead, she looks annoyed. Mary, she says, my name is Mary. Now, will you go get more wood, please? I stare at the girl, suddenly sick. Mary, I repeat. She nods impatiently. For hours now, my thoughts have fluttered and flitted tirelessly around me overhead. Now they stop short and drop out of the sky, one by one, until just one remains. Do you want to know the gender? The technician said brightly. Sex, I replied absently. It was summertime, a few months before Shannon quit. I was holding my phone steady as I recorded a video of the ultrasound screen. The angry women loved any chance they could get to crawl inside me. I glanced at the technician and added, You mean the sex of the baby? That's what I said. You said gender, not sex. The technician glanced helplessly at Caleb, who said, Yes, we want to know. Alrighty then, let's just see what we can find. The technician's wand moved slowly over my stomach, like one of those deep-sea drones scanning the ocean floor for any possible signs of life. I stared at the gray matter, imagining my baby as a jellyfish, a sea otter, a darting silver minnow. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Mills, you're having a girl. What do you think about the name Mary? Caleb whispered as we left the office. At that moment, there was a quiet little thud in my stomach, her first kick. That's her name, Mary. Mary. My mind, which felt like a beehive up until this moment, buzzing and angry and alive, now feels hollowed out, my brain not a brain at all, but a husk of one, a plastic replica. That's a beautiful name, I say numbly. Did Caleb tell anyone we were going to name the baby Mary? It's certainly possible. We had been calling the baby Mary out loud to each other. He might have mentioned it to his parents, or his brothers, or maybe a neighbor in town. But even if he did, It's hard to think clearly through my headache, which has returned in full force. I blink stupidly through the pain. I hadn't shared the name online, had I? No, definitely not. I did that only once when I was pregnant with Junebug, and the experience was so miserable that I swore I would never do it again. I'd spent the last month of that pregnancy watching, while thousands of people filled the comments section of my posts daily, ripping apart my child's identity with glee, desecrating her existence before she even came into the world. Dear God, the names keep getting worse. Future ignorant bitch alert. Wee-oo. But even if I hadn't shared the name myself, that doesn't mean someone might not have been able to guess it. Plenty of followers have guessed the names of our future children correctly in the past. When you have thousands of comments on a picture of your swollen stomach, it becomes a matter of odds. And besides, there is only a small collection of names that reasonably fits into our aesthetic. I know that. A chill runs through me. Maybe old Caleb is actually one of my followers. Maybe he's a psychotic stalker, a man whose own striking similarities to my husband have convinced him of his entitlement to me, and who has designed this whole thing as some elaborate form of cosplay. Even before this thought is fully formed, though, I throw it out. What's happening here, would take too much work, too much planning for one person to pull off. No, this is a multi-person job. These people, whoever they are cunning. They're cunning and angry and dangerous. They're, hello, the wood? Mary is staring at me, waving a hand in front of my face, a distinctly modern gesture, I think suspiciously, before realizing I have no real evidence for that argument. This time, I ignore the carvings on the door frame. I open the door and step quickly onto the porch, shutting it behind me. The wood is stacked in the same place on the front porch as we stack it at home. I drop into a crouch and begin loading up an armful. When I've managed to stack 6 pieces in my arms, I stand up and look out, for the second time today, at the craggy mountain peaks backlit by the fading light. This is my property. This is my land. These are my mountains. And yet, this is not my house or my family. These are not my chickens. This is not my nightgown. Something is lodged painfully in my throat, a rock, or maybe a memory. I try to swallow, but I can't. My headache flares and I wince. It feels like my brain has been carved up with a butcher's knife. I take a deep, shaky breath. With the wood balanced in the crook of one elbow, my free hand travels to my stomach instinctively, looking for a place to rest, to comfort, and then it freezes. Mary. Something horrible is happening here. This place, these people, I look out across the fields. The sun is nearly gone now. It'll be dark soon. In an instant, the phrase takes on new weight. Dark soon. Dark, as in impossible to see. Go. In a breath, I'm gone. By the time I register the sound of the wood clattering to the porch, I'm already down the stairs, sprinting across the frostbitten grass, running. Faster now, quieter now. Forget the driveway and just get to the woods. Behind me, a door slaps open. Someone cries, "Mama!" The barn is a blur of red alongside me, and then it's behind me, and I'm flying toward the tree line. "Mama!" I don't look back. I reach the trees and then, yes, I'm in the trees, crashing wildly through the leaves, my heart thrashing to the rhythm of my pumping legs, the ghostly blur of birch trees flying past, and then the world goes white. For the righteous one may fall 7 times, and he will get up again, but the wicked will be made to stumble by calamity. 1 second I am running, and the next I am on the ground, writhing, trying to understand. What is, why is, I see the pain before I feel it. A steel trap clamped around my ankle, metal teeth sunken fully into flesh. No, I think distantly. That can't be right. And then the nerve signals finally reach my brain, and a terrible noise pours from my mouth, a high, wailing keen. I'm on my side, trying and failing to pry open the steel maul with my own 2 shaking hands, when I see, in the distance, old Caleb jogging across the fields toward me. I scream, or try to, and then my eyes roll back in my head. My God, forgive me. And then old Caleb is here, on one knee. He presses something, and the trap springs open. Relax, woman, he shouts over my screams of pain. Calm down. My ankle, I scream. My ankle, my ankle. I am in the leaves, gasping in pain. And then old Caleb is carrying me back to the house, my body thrown over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. And then I am in the kitchen by the fire, Mary dabbing ointment along the jagged river canyons of my skin while I shout and twitch in agony. Even through the pain and the fear and the shock, I can't help but notice that the ointment smells like bacon grease. I need stitches, a doctor. Call an ambulance right now. The two boys are sitting at the kitchen table, looking at their hands. Maeve is down the hallway, sobbing behind a closed door. Mama, 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 like she feels the pain herself. And then there is Mary, pulling something out of a folded leather pouch. A needle, yes, and a thread so thick it almost looks like twine. Hold her still, she tells old Caleb. This is going to hurt. 8. The night I met Caleb Mills, he was sitting in a folding chair for our church group. He held a flimsy paper plate steady with one hand and was picking at a mound of soft cheese with the other. He glanced up at me. He was cute. The kind of guy who looked like a farmer's son even while he was sitting in a church basement in Cambridge, wearing a button-down shirt and khaki pants. We made eye contact. Then I sat down and we didn't look at each other again. The next meeting, he asked for my name. The meeting after that, he asked where I was from. The fourth meeting, did I want to get coffee sometime? That's how slowly our relationship moved at the beginning. Dating in my religion works that way. It feels like you're rolling very slowly down a very long runway. Then, right as you think you're going to die for lack of momentum, you find yourself lifting up, 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 spinning wildly toward the sun in a sudden aerial ascent. On our first date, Caleb bought me a scone. He told me about his family, his fancy political father, and his soon-to-be fancy political brothers, all of them senators in waiting, like a little line of princes. Jack, John, George, Henry, Caleb. Such a perfectly American list that I would later wonder if their father had allowed one of his political consultants to advise on names with highest rates of electability. His mother had always wanted a daughter, Caleb told me, but instead she got 5 boys. He smiled ruefully at that, and I thought, I would take 5 of those. In exchange, I told him about my dead father, my 3-legged family. He learned about Abigail and her fiancé. He winced when I said Bryce, and that inspired a rare gift from me, a genuine laugh. Then I told him about the mountain range that circled my town, how rarefied the air felt at such high elevation. You can't help but feel like you're living closer to heaven. So you don't want to stay on the East Coast after graduation then? Caleb was from the Dust Bowls of California. Like me, he thought the lifestyle inherent to living in a city was unnatural, a world meant for gerbils, not people. Where do you want to go then? I paused. Where did I want to go? I want a farm with chickens. I want to live near my mother. I want a view of the mountains from my bedroom window, and I'd like to study theology. Part-time, of course, and only after the children are grown. This was pretty much exactly what every good Christian girl back home claimed to want, except for the theology bit. I'd added that part for myself. Caleb didn't say anything, just cocked his head and gave me a strangely wistful smile, like he was already feeling nostalgic for the moment we currently found ourselves in. How about you? I said, suddenly anxious. What do you want? He looked shyly into his cappuccino cup. I don't know. He shrugged, stared thoughtfully past me. What you said sounds nice. On our second date, Caleb took me to dinner at an Italian restaurant in the North End, and I realized he was capital R rich. Over $80 plates of truffle pasta and cold glasses of lemon water, he said, I've been thinking about that farm non-stop since we met. It was an innocuous statement, yet his face was suddenly bright red. I reached for my water. I couldn't decide if I loved the taste of truffle or hated it. What farm? The one you want, with the chickens. And the mountains? Oh, I said, fingers paused around the cool glass. Of course, what about it? Now that I'd learned more about Caleb, the idea of a farm seemed like amateur hour for dreaming big. And anyways, the girls back home talked about farms only because it was distasteful for them to say what they really wanted, to be like Caleb, wealthy. I can't stop thinking about it, he said. You could teach me everything you know, and well, I'm a quick learner. He was blushing so furiously that I might have worried he was having an allergic reaction if I wasn't so preoccupied with the present issue at hand. Teach. What did Caleb mean by teach? I never said I knew how to farm, yet here we were, talking about living in the middle of nowhere, teaching each other how to, what? Rake dirt, milk a cow, cut a chicken's head off. The way Caleb was staring at me with that intense, pained look in his face. He clearly needed an answer, but an answer to what? Relax, I told myself. This is just a moment. It doesn't really matter. Here is what did matter. He was young and handsome and wealthy. Most important of all, he liked me, really liked me. He said I was fascinating and funny and beautiful. No one had ever thought I was any of those things. I'd spent my whole life alone, floating like a specter at the far edges of elementary school friendships, then glaring at the huddled cliques I walked past in middle school, then openly denouncing them in high school. And here, suddenly, was a fundamentally likable person, somehow liking me. Is it a choice if there's only one option? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take. I leaned across the table and pressed my hand over his. Sorry, I mean his, Caleb's, and at my touch he let out a great gasp of air, and I realized he'd been holding his breath, waiting for me to decide. On the third date, we discussed marriage. On the fourth date, Caleb stood stock still as I leaned forward and pressed my lips, just barely, to his. I felt his heartbeat vibrating through my mouth. The kiss was dry. It lasted for a second. As I pulled away, I found myself imagining his tongue, the size of it. A shiver ran through me. Caleb touched my arm. You have goosebumps. He looked awestruck that he was capable of having that effect on me. I didn't know what to say. I felt the heat rising off my face like steam. I'd never understood what it felt like to want. I stepped forward and pressed my face into Caleb's chest, suddenly desperate to feel compression against my skin. He wrapped his arms around me and we stood there like that for a while, both of us breathing hard. Then I felt something long and firm pressed against my thigh, and I stepped quickly back. The weekend of our engagement, Caleb's parents flew into the city to celebrate and paid for my mother to fly in too. Caleb's father rented out the back room of a 4-star steakhouse in Back Bay. I wore a white dress made of a crepe linen fabric. Caleb's mother had bought it for me and shipped it to my dorm room. She had also encouraged me over the phone to invite friends to the party, and I had tactfully declined, citing my interest in making this a family affair. You look like Jackie Kennedy, my mother whispered when she saw me at the restaurant. She was wearing a simple navy shift dress, a pattern she'd sewn herself, and was gazing at the fabric of my dress with an expression of nervous awe. Let me see that ring. I held out my hand, so proud that it felt like my head was going to lift off my neck and bob around by the ceiling. It's an antique, I said as my mother turned my finger this way, then that way, letting the diamond catch the light. She looked as thunderstruck by the display as I felt by it. It's just over 4 carats. Natalie, my mother breathed. It's huge. I know, I said, matching her tone. I told Caleb it was way too big. She gave me a look of approval. That was the way women operated in my community. If you wanted to be a wealthy Christian woman and maintain good standing, you needed to publicly disavow your luxuries in order to maintain possession of them. It was a strange tug and pull I'd borne witness to my entire life. The only surprise was that it was finally happening to me. I was becoming the kind of woman other women were jealous of. Each time I looked at the ring, I felt an intoxicating combination of embarrassment and glee. It was a rich, decadent piece of jewelry. If I looked at it for too long, I started to feel sick. It was too much. It was a shameful display of wealth. I should give it back and demand we find something smaller. And also, I'd launch a holy war before I parted with it. As for Caleb, he insisted it was a perfect diamond for a woman like me. I was a flawless woman, he said, a timeless piece of decoration. The engagement party was filled with Caleb's family's friends, as well as some major donors to Doug's current senatorial campaign. What I would learn quickly, Doug was always building toward, in the middle of, or conducting a post-mortem on a campaign. For most of the evening, I sat in a booth with my mother while Caleb and his older brothers and his father, Doug, schmoozed through the crowd, bray laughing and backslapping. I'd already lost track of which brother was which. They looked so much alike. The tech one, I thought firmly, staring at David, or was it Henry? No, John was the finance one. Yes, Henry was the tech one, and George and Jack were the political advisors. Amelia floated quietly behind the men, smiling brightly in their shadow, occasionally tugging at her pink Chanel skirt and blazer set like some special edition presidential Barbie. When I first met her earlier that night, she told me in a soft, fluttery falsetto to call her Mama. I had thought her teeth were so white they almost looked purple. Then I saw how much wine she drank, and I realized they were actually just purple. I watched my mother watch Amelia across the room. I knew we were thinking the same thing. Then my mother turned and looked at me. A silent conversation unfolded. "This is what you want, then?" She seemed genuinely surprised. She didn't know Caleb or his family yet, but she'd seen enough to understand what was happening here. When she had talked about my future, it had always been Natalie the professor, Natalie the academic. Of course, the assumption of children and homemaking was always there too, hovering in the white space between all those hypothetical careers. My mother, a breadwinner herself, was lopsidedly progressive in that way. She didn't believe in divorce, but she did genuinely believe her smartest daughter would have it all. A good job and a good family, in Jesus' name. Amen. "If you marry this man," she said to me now with her blinking eyes, "you will become his smiling shadow." A year ago, I wouldn't have wanted that, but the last 6 months had changed me. I blinked back an answer. "I thought I wanted the world, Mama, but I've seen the world now, and I want no part in it." At the other end of the room, Caleb's father clinked his glass. "Can the happy couple make their way to the stage?" The crowd parted like the Red Sea before me. I didn't hesitate. 9, it's nighttime. I'm slouched on a wobbly, ancient bullshit chair in the corner of this wobbly, ancient bullshit kitchen, holding a big hunk of ice wrapped in a dish towel to my eye. Yes, my eye. Remember when my face was the problem mere hours ago? Remember when the worst thing that had happened to me was getting slapped? Well, I never thought I would look back fondly on a knockout. My foot, Lord, my foot, is bandaged and elevated on a chair opposite me. I've passed out twice now, once from the pain of the needle piercing the muscle, and once when I woke up halfway through and saw what my stitched skin looked like. Now even looking at the tightly wrapped bandage makes me whimper with grief. The pain. How to describe it? I'll be brave and say it has dulled to a roar. It feels like my body has depleted a month's worth of energy from the mere translation of so many nerve signals screaming emergency to my brain. It's not just my foot either. Every bit of me feels broken. My brain is a smashed computer drive. My memory and logic and intellect crushed into little shattered pieces, glittering and useless in the dim firelight. Emphasis on dim. The light from the fire just barely illuminates one half of the kitchen, leaving the rest of the room in shadows. I sit there in the flickering light while the girls move all around me, disappearing confidently into the darkness and just as quickly reappearing in the light as they walk around the room, making dinner. Perfect little homemakers. Big fat bitches. Sorry, Lord, but... Excuse me, I call out weakly. Mary says sharply, "Don't answer her," right as Maeve pipes up, "Yes, Mama." I shake my head softly. My eyes are warm with tears. "I want to go home," I whisper. "Please take me home." "But Mama," Maeve starts. Mary cuts her off. "Will you go get some firewood, Mavie?" Maeve hesitates, her big, bright eyes locked sadly on me, and then she nods and walks to the door. As soon as Maeve is outside, Mary crosses the room in 4 short steps and crouches by my chair, so that we are face to face. "I'm going to say this once," she says, in a decidedly less friendly voice than the one she used with Maeve. "So listen closely. You are my mother." "I'm not your mother," I nearly growl, but I clench my teeth. "This is your home," Mary continues. "This is your life. You're behaving like a child right now, and you're not a child. You're a grown woman with children of her own to take care of. And do you know what? Your actual children can't stand when you act like this, especially Maeve. It makes her very upset." My mouth is open. I'm about to protest. This is not my life. You are not my children. But she barrels forward, leaving no room for me to speak. "You're a grown woman," she repeats. "You should know not to walk willy-nilly through the woods during trapping season. So really, you have no one to blame but yourself. Now," she says and claps her hands like she's trying to startle me out of hypnosis. "I'm going to give you 2 options. You can pull yourself together for dinner, or you can go back to your bedroom and shut the door. So which is it, bed or dinner?" I take a quick inventory of my own needs. I have a raging headache, a foot that is connected to the rest of my body by 12 inches of string, and I'm starving. One of those problems can be fixed. "I'll stay and eat," I mutter. "Wonderful," Mary says, in a tone that indicates otherwise. Soon the 2 boys come barreling into the house, shouting and stomping their boots, followed immediately by old Caleb, who tips off his cowboy hat and sets it on a hook. He walks over to Mary and hands her a large sack, which she takes and sets on the counter. I watch as she pulls 3 fish from the bag, each the length of her forearm and the color of quicksilver. "Beautiful," she says, and asks Abel to fillet them. He goes outside into the nighttime with the fish and returns 10 minutes later with a handful of long white strips, which Mary drops into a boiling pot. "You can set the table for dinner," she says to me over her shoulder. When I don't move, Maeve and Noah do my chore for me. And then we are seated at the table, me closest to the firelight, and old Caleb at the far end, barely visible in the darkness. Mary is walking around, ladling soup into our bowls. The spread for dinner looks nothing like the meals I've made for our natural dinner series. In the videos, I showcased homemade cornbread, baked carrots, thin strips of pork with homemade cherry marmalade spooned over the plate in mouth-watering swirls. On the table before me is a single steaming crock of watery-looking soup with some vegetables and chunks of white flaky fish bobbing along the surface, and a small plate of biscuits. The meal looks, frankly, like shit. "Are you feeling better, Mama?" I look up. It's Abel who spoke to me. He's staring at me from the opposite end of the table. Just a meekly firelit shadow, and still through the darkness I can see he's the spitting image of Caleb. Ruddy cheeks, blazingly innocent eyes. His voice is soft and light. It hasn't yet cracked, but he holds himself like he's planning for it to crack very soon. "Well," old Caleb says loudly from the dark, startling me, "answer the boy." "Yes," I whisper. "Good," Abel says. "You really shouldn't be wandering around in the woods all alone. That's how the savages will get you. Right, Pa? Right?" Noah chimes in. "Better be careful, or they'll stick you in the belly with an arrow, like this." He mimes, stabbing himself in the stomach, then leans back in the chair with a groan, eyes wide, the very picture of a shocked and dying soldier. "Mary, old Caleb says, ignoring the boys. Lead Grace. The hilarity dissipates immediately. Noah sits forward in his chair. Mary clears her throat, and they bow their heads as one. I watch everyone eat for a good long minute. The boys shovel big, sloshing spoonfuls of soup into their mouths. Mary sits with her hands in her lap, watching her brothers with obvious disdain. Maeve stirs the broth with her spoon, talking quietly to the bits of carrot and celery and fish that bob along the surface, until Mary snaps at her to stop playing with her food, so Maeve lifts a spoonful of soup to her mouth, looking regretful to have to kill such precious friends. I hesitate, then reach for the biscuit that looks the least likely to be poisoned, a fluffy golden one from the dead center of the pile. If it were possible for a biscuit to look cheerful, then this one does. It's slick with butter, warm in my fingers. I take a small bite, chewing slowly. Oh, it's delicious. The butter is as fresh as anything I've ever made, and the biscuit is perfect in texture, soft and fluffy and just a bit crumbly. For a moment, I stop thinking altogether. I take another bite, then another, and suddenly the biscuit is gone, and I'm reaching eagerly for another. After dinner, as the fire is dying and this world is turning slowly to black, Mary and old Caleb half walk me, half carry me to bed. I'm feeling a bit nauseous now. My cheeks are hot to the touch. You poisoned me, I mutter as Mary tucks me into bed, the room just a few shades lighter than pitch black. Those biscuits. You. Quiet, she says. You just have a fever. You're lucky it's not worse, after all you've done. She leaves the bedroom and then comes back. Here, she says, and shoves a spoon roughly into my mouth before I can protest. She misses my mouth a bit, and a thick liquid drips down my chin. I swallow the amount that made it into my mouth, making a face. It tastes like rancid cherries. That will help, she says. You're welcome. And then she's gone. I turn over onto my other side, and suddenly I'm staring straight into Maeve's wide eyes, like a little owl. Who? She must have climbed into bed while Mary was guiding me in. Hello, Mama, she says, barely visible. Hello, Maeve, I mumble back. I've never felt weaker in my life. Sorry for your boo-boo. Thank you, Maeve. We lie like that for a long time. My breathing becomes hoarse and ragged. My teeth begin to chatter. I wonder if I will die tonight. Maeve, I say softly. Where are we, really? Home, she whispers back. Home. Pointless. This is pointless, like slipping quarters into an empty gumball machine. Is there another word for home? What do you call home, Maeve? Oh, she says, as I drift slowly away from her. Yesteryear, Mama. That's what we call home. 10. There were 400 people at our wedding, which was hosted at Caleb's parents' estate in California the summer after my first year of college. I wore a strapless gown with a pearl necklace. Caleb wore a navy suit. We stood beneath the shade of an olive tree as the pastor said the magic words I'd been waiting to hear my whole life. I now declare you man and wife. The audience rose to their feet in a breathtaking ovation. The pastor's final words, his prophecy of our future, disappeared beneath the waves of applause. Caleb grabbed me and twirled me and dipped me low, so my hair was brushing the ground. Then he whispered in my ear, I can't wait to taste you. At the reception, a 12-person band was playing a famous song by Cher, and I was sitting in one of the chairs at the main dining table, drinking a glass of water, enjoying a moment alone after so many rounds of small talk with balding, Botoxed billionaire donors. Vote Mills, when my sister dropped into the chair next to me and said, I think I might be pregnant. She was 21 years old that night, wearing an emerald chiffon bride, East-made dress that Amelia had picked out. The dress had looked beautiful in the catalog, but had the unfortunate effect of making my sister, who was generally understood to be the prettier of the two of us, look like an unappreciated vegetable. She and Bryce had married several months earlier, with a backyard reception at his parents' house. She had cried all day long, insisting they were tears of happiness. Bryce had passed out shirtless on the lawn well before nightfall. She amended her statement now. I took 2 tests, and they're both positive, so I'm most likely pregnant. Well, I set my empty glass down. I'm so happy for you, she sighed. I just wish Bryce wasn't so drunk right now. I tried to channel the patience of my mother. Isn't Bryce always drunk? She didn't reply, just looked longingly out at the dance floor, where Bryce was headbanging wildly, his tie fashioned like a hippie headband on his forehead. He mimed an electric guitar, then dropped to his knees and licked the length of the invisible neck. He's been so temperamental lately. Temperamental, I thought, was a particularly dignified way to describe a man who had, earlier that day, screamingly accused the concierge of the 4-star hotel where they were staying, courtesy of the Mills family, of rifling through his varsity football high school duffel bag to steal the Visa gift card from his wallet. Go tell him, I said, suddenly desperate for both of them to be gone. Tell him you're pregnant right now. You're right. That'd make him so happy, don't you think? Of course it would. A child is always a gift. Then my husband, walked up in his immaculately tailored suit, and all the bad feelings fell away. I don't mean to interrupt, Caleb began, but I had already jumped up and taken his hand. It was midnight when we left the reception. We were staying in the carriage house on the opposite side of the estate. In one moment, we were stumbling through the open door, kissing and pulling at buttons, and the next moment we were naked on the bed, frozen in Grecian poses of despair. Both of us were virgins. I could see now that Caleb's comment to me earlier at the altar had not been, as I originally thought, an indication of pure erotic instinct, but rather an act of deep courage, a last-ditch Hail Mary effort to summon his own sexual prowess into the world before he faced the most intimidating vision of his life, his wife's naked body. Caleb's hand hovered over my breast, then pressed firmly, hands spread wide like a catcher's mitt. Both of us let out a noise, a pairing of grunts. He'd never seen an adult woman's body, he told me that night. I would later learn this was technically a lie, that his mother had a tendency to take baths with her sons well into their early adolescence, that he'd gone to third base with a second cousin at a family reunion. In an effort for momentum, I reached down and wrapped my hand around his penis. So this was what it felt like. Soft, like lambskin, but, honestly, about 50% less inflated than I expected. Caleb let out another grunt and rocked his hips against me. I was equal parts nauseated and aroused. I could feel his heartbeat pulsing in my grip. Caleb's eyes were closed, his mouth parted in a grim expression of pleasure. Maybe, he muttered, you could, you know. A thread of irritation stitched itself in my chest. No, Caleb, I don't know. Well, you could spit into your hand, or maybe kinda use your mouth, you know, to... Nope, I cried out. No, thank you. Let's just do it the normal way, please. He sighed and opened his eyes. It took several minutes for him to maneuver halfway inside me. It helped that I was wet. It didn't help that he was about as hard as half-risen dough. I couldn't believe it. All my life, I'd been imagining a sausage or a cucumber, something to fill me completely. I had not been prepared for sex to feel and to look like Caleb's penis did, which was fine in girth and length but lacked the fortitude to enter me of its own accord. I felt like I needed to throw a dish towel over his penis and wait an hour to let it rise. The silver lining of Caleb's softness was that losing my virginity didn't hurt. It felt more like a sponge was moving near my stomach, like someone was very gently cleaning me from the inside out. I love you, I whispered as he breathed heavily in my ear. I love you, God. I love you, God. Caleb met his first missionary ejaculation with abject panic. Oh, holy shit, he gasped. What the hell? A year later, the spring of my sophomore year, I was walking to a review class for an upcoming final when I ran into Rena for the first time in a long while. The poor thing was not doing well. I was living off campus by then, in an apartment that Caleb's parents had rented for us. So it spoke to just how big of a story this was that I'd overheard it in the hallways to begin with. The boy Rena had been seeing had unprotected anal sex with someone else. In response to that, Rena needed to get an AIDS test and had been so infuriated by her own humiliation that she retaliated by giving a blowjob to his brother, a high school student who'd been visiting for the weekend. And in response to that, her crush had called her a fat, ugly whore in the middle of a packed dance floor. Lord have mercy on their souls. Now she looked awful, bloated and sweaty and hung over like a human beer can. She was smoking a cigarette outside the building I needed to enter. When she saw me, her mouth actually fell open. Natalie, my God! I was just past 6 months pregnant. She stared at my bump with a look that harkened a word I hadn't thought of since childhood. Gobsmacked. She looked absolutely gobsmacked. "You're glowing," she said, with obvious disappointment. I pointed at the cigarette in her fingers. "Do you mind?" She stubbed out the cigarette, still eyeing me with abject surprise. I knew what she was thinking. I was twice as beautiful as I'd ever been. I'd never been ugly per se, but there had always been a certain sharpness to my expression, a hawkishness to my gaze that kept me from being outright attractive. At first I'd thought the pregnancy might have added some fat to my face, some much-needed softening. Eventually, though, I realized what it was that made me look so different. For the first time in my life, I was happy. "I got married last summer," I said, "to a man named Caleb Mills. He's a senior. Do you know him?" We smiled cagily at each other. "Of course I know him," she said. "Well, I don't know him, but I know of his dad, obviously." Her gaze reached my ring finger. "Congratulations." Like she was swallowing a mouthful of blood. "Where are you off to this summer?" I asked. She stared longingly at the crushed cigarette by her boot. An internship at McKinsey. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that girls like Rena said they wanted. Competitive and respectful and well paid. And after all the time I'd spent online in those lonely months of my first semester, all those midnight hours poring through panicked chat threads and editorial screeds about the desperate plight of the uppity working woman, I knew exactly what would come next. As long as Rena didn't screw up royally over the next few summers, she'd get a job offer from the firm after graduation. 6 figures right out of the gate. Living the dream. She would start working 70 or 80 hours a week, subsisting mostly on a diet of cocaine and Red Bull. Her co-workers would comprise a bullpen of male colleagues, men who screwed the small handful of women in the office non-stop, personally and professionally. From here on out, Rena's life was going to be hard. She would have to work hard to get the job, and hard to keep it, and even harder to get promoted. And any promotion she received would lead only to more work, more responsibilities, more hours in the office, and in the meantime she would have to squeeze out a few free hours a week to do everything else: date, stay fit, buy groceries, see friends. If she was one of the lucky ones, she would keep receiving small little bumps to her salary. Smaller, of course, than the bumps her male colleagues received, but no matter, no biggie. Rena would grow used to this quickly. The simple act of receiving less than she wanted at the same exact time she watched someone else receive more than she could have hoped for. She would spend her 20s feeling disappointment and labeling it gratitude. And then she would convince herself that this was a form of Buddhist enlightenment. Be happy with what you have. This is what she would tell herself each time she was faced with the fact that she had once again received less money, less praise, and even a smaller portion of blow than her male co-workers. Don't forget to say thank you. Little bumps, little bumps. During this time period of professional growth, Rena would also do her best to fall in love and get married, and if she managed that, then years later, when she finally got around to having kids, she would act utterly shocked when her doctor informed her she was a geriatric candidate, and it would be an uphill battle to get pregnant. If she was lucky, and from what I had seen, Rena had never been all that lucky. She'd have to do only 1 or 2 rounds of IVF, and there would be only a small handful of months where she found herself joking loudly about lighting money on fire while her husband jabbed at the fat of her ass with a needle. his mind starting to wander past his miserable aging wife to the fun young assistant in his office, the one who was easy and light and funny, the one who had started to look subconsciously to him like the appropriate age for a woman to become pregnant. And when the time came, when Rena finally gave birth, when she finally looked around and realized she'd made it, she was at the top of the mountain. She had it all. The landscape would look like this. Her husband no longer wanted to touch her, and her boss no longer wanted to promote her, and her childless friends no longer wanted to spend time with her, and her friends with children no longer had time to see her. And Rena, sweet preent, Easius Rena, would complain about none of it, not the disappearing husband or the flailing career or the crushing loneliness, not a word of it to anyone, because she would technically be one of the lucky ones, a flush retirement account and 4 months maternity leave, in Jesus' name, amen. And in the world that Rena would soon inhabit, you don't get to complain about those kinds of problems. You don't get to complain about privilege. It was clear Rena was dreading it, not just the internship but the rest of her own life, as if she'd been shot through by some fairy tale curse, as if she wasn't one of the most spoiled people on the planet, free to do whatever she wanted, if only she had the brains or the courage to consider any other path forward beyond the one that feminism, that nasty witch, had offered her. Silly, stupid Rena had bitten the poisoned apple, straight down to the core. Standing there that day, she looked so miserable at the prospect of her own empowered future that I nearly laughed out loud. "Well," I said brightly, "congratulations to you too, then. I know those internships are so hard to get." I was practically choking on my satisfaction at this point. The euphoria of my victory was making my vision blur. I won, I won, I won. You stupid fucking bitch. Sorry, Lord. I won. "Well," Rena said, "I guess I'll see you around or something." "You won't, actually." I couldn't resist. I just couldn't. I've decided to leave school. Caleb's graduating this spring, and I can always finish up my degree online. We really want to spend some time in Paris before the baby comes. It's a girl, by the way. Did I mention that? I'm having a girl. If I could have punctuated that sentence by socking Rena straight in her miserable little face, I would have. What perfect synchronicity that would have offered to our short, joyless relationship. Instead, I waved goodbye, making a point to really wiggle my fingers so the diamond caught the light, and then I slipped past her, the first angry woman in my life, and skipped forward into the future.